I'm going to also start by thanking all the men and women around me here, because we've been through this before, and the policies that we've worked collaboratively on diligently to get into the budget process are working. We have much that we agree on with the governor today, from high-achieving schools that are safe and clean to growing jobs and opportunities for every Pennsylvanian to have a family-sustaining career. We share many of the same goals the governor outlined today, and we hope to be celebrating policies that accomplish these shared goals later this year as part of an on-time budget. However, the job ahead of us is difficult because we are starting this conversation in a hole. This administration has overspent the current budget by more than $500 million. This, unfortunately, has even outstripped our strong financial growth and tax revenues here in the Commonwealth. This cannot continue, and it's money that the taxpayers will never see again. We want to see many of our shared goals become a reality, but do not believe that the answer is just new government programs, more spending, or additional debt. Our programs and our departments have underperformed for too long from a lack of active management. But the only solution, unfortunately, that government typically comes up with is simply asking taxpayers to simply pay more. We need to realize more spending alone is not just the answer, and stop ignoring the historic investments that the governor has already outlined earlier today in his own speech, and that we were all supportive of. We will have meaningful debates and discussions over how to meet Pennsylvania's challenges for the next budget, just like we do every year. We also intend to seriously engage with our members and colleagues from the Senate, our chairman, the governor, on how we can better manage our current resources, existing programs, and our current investments. We, as citizens, are all required to live within our means in each of our home budgets. It's time state government did so as well. With that, I'll turn it over to Leader Corman.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you very much. I found it interesting, the governor began his remarks by touting some of our successes where we've worked together. And there have been many, from reforming our institutions to setting an economy here in Pennsylvania where we are at record low unemployment, we're at record high employment, which he mentioned, and we're at record high in wages. But we didn't achieve that together by raising taxes, which even though the governor said there's no new taxes, there's over $500 million in new taxes in this budget document, by raising spending at high levels and by creating more debt. That is not how we achieved our success together. So we're going to, this was what I referred to as a red meat speech, right? You give out all the sort of talking points that for his supporters, which he hit on just about every one of them today, and that's what governors do. So I certainly respect that from this governor. But what we'll do is go back to the recipe for success. We'll pull him back to the middle. We will get a fiscally responsible budget that does not ask the taxpayers to invest more in state government, but way we can unleash our employers in this state to employ more people by keeping taxes low, by getting rid of burdensome regulations, because at the end of the day, our communities are better when people are working. Our communities are safer, our schools are better, our healthcare institutions are all better when people are working. And so we will work with this governor and our friends on the opposite side of the aisle to continue to work on our success, which is limiting the governor's encroachment into the private sector. With that, let me introduce the Appropriations Chairman, Stan Saylor.
Good afternoon. Well, I appreciate the governor addressing the General Assembly today with his vision of where Pennsylvania he wants to see it go. What we heard is more of the same that we heard last budget session. This budget is more about spending, more taxes, more debt. It pays lip service, as the senator said, to many of our special interests in the Commonwealth, but it lacks a lot of key details needed to be successful in implementing the governor's vision. This budget is long on aspirations and short on details. After hearing the governor's budget address, two things struck me. The first is that this administration is not serious about controlling spending and following the laws enacted by this General Assembly with the budget. Supplemental numbers this year that have been submitted by him for requests for this fiscal year are way too high, and we need to find a way to get that spending under control. The two biggest offenders of overspending are, as usual, suspects, the Department of Health and Human Services and the Department of Corrections. The governor's proposal says that DHS needs an additional $492 million in the current year. When you dig into the proposal, you can see they also buried another $307 million in current year costs, which will be pushed into next fiscal year. That means DHS needs an additional $800 million just in its current fiscal year. That's an overage of 6%. In the private sector, people would be fired for those kind of overages and lack of performance. Just another day here for us politicians. Time and time again, we see overtime costs run in this budget in the Department of Corrections. This year's proposal, the governor is seeking an additional $90 million for corrections. Our prison population is lower. We have built new prisons to help improve safety and efficiencies and closed old and outdated prisons. It is unacceptable to have overspending in the Corrections Department. As we move through the budget process, these two agencies will be a major focus of our hearings. DHS accounts for over 80% of this new spending in his current proposal. Reform is needed. The path we are on is simply unsustainable. The second thing that struck me in this budget address today was the amount of debt that this governor is calling for. In short, this year, the governor wants to increase the debt in Pennsylvania on working families by over $5 billion. Let me repeat, our increased debt load on Pennsylvanians of $5 billion. We have made some key steps toward getting Pennsylvania's debt under control, working with the House, the Senate, and the governor in doing so over the last several years. It's easy just to put things on credit cards and then ask other people in the future to pay for it. That's not a solution for Pennsylvania. House Republicans and senators are going to continue to work on this budget to make it more fiscally responsible, put more money in the rainy day fund, and have a lower spend number than what the governor is proposing today. I thank you, and I'd like to recognize the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee, Pat Brown. Pat?
Thanks, Dan. As everyone knows, this is the first budget of the new decade, 2020. And anytime you turn a decade, it's a good opportunity to look back on lessons learned and what path it would lead us to the future. I think it's safe to say that this decade, this turn of the decade, gives us an opportunity to say what a difference a decade makes. When we turn the last decade, in one of the most difficult economic periods in our country's history, we were facing deficits at record levels. Now, of course, we're in a much different, much better place. Last year, for the first time in 10 years, actual revenues exceeding estimates. We have surpluses that we've actually made the largest deposit into the rainy day fund in 10 years. And now with appropriate management, we have the possibility of ending this year's budget again with a surplus. We have to make sure we understand, notwithstanding that good news, what got us there. And that is three things: controlling spending, prioritizing our programmatic spending and costs, and limiting spending to our revenue capacity below the rate of inflation. And since we've done that, now that we turn the decade with fiscal responsibility, the keynote marker for success for us, I believe, in a period where revenues are not keeping up with expenditures, is the IFO's estimate of a $12 billion cumulative deficit. We've cut that in half. We've cut that in half with our fiscal responsibility. No doubt, the issues that created the most challenges over the last decade were the unpredictability of financial matters that are out of our control. Capital market performance and economic performance not following historic trends, things we just weren't used to. Both presented tremendous risk to us and our responsibility to achieve balance. We responded together in a bipartisan fashion by advancing aggressive reforms which reduce our overall risk. Pension reform to reduce our capital market risk, human services reform to reduce our demographic risk, corrections reform to reduce our criminal justice risk. But now as we move forward to ensuring long-term fiscal sustainability, now that financial matters out of our control are more predictable, we should not turn back the clock and create the same problem with matters that are in our control. In the past, it has been common for the governor to include in his budget proposals additional spending, supplemental spending, above what was included in the most recent General Appropriations Act. And in the past, those suggestions, those requests were within historic levels. Yet at approximately $900 million in requests in this proposal are far beyond what our collective bodies in the House and the Senate could predict. The governor's proposal recognizes this unpredictability by deeming it too large for the finances of 1 year, as Chairman Saylor had mentioned, and moving it into the budgeting year 2020, 2021, in excess of $300 million. It also does something unique that I don't think we've seen before. The governor has presented budget proposals to us that we believe are unsustainable, well above the rate of inflation. But now that unsustainability is not based on future spending numbers, it's based on past spending numbers, which is something that makes no sense. The governor's proposal does, I believe, include some meritorious items: continuing investment in the future of our children, additional resources for workforce development, greater investment in those citizens who we serve that are the most vulnerable in our constituency. However, the governor's approach to supplemental spending, if approved, if given validity as part of our actions this year, especially given the unpredictability of the amount, puts our ability to budget and to fund those initiatives tremendously at risk. Even worse, if approved, if given validity, it could snowball in the future, requiring us to dedicate more and more future revenue to things we've already spent. This, my friends, by very definition, is deficit spending, arguably unconstitutional and something we must avoid at all costs to ensure responsible, sustainable budgeting. Seeing revenues perform better than estimated in fiscal years ending with budget surpluses is without question a much better fiscal picture for all of us. However, in examining the governor's budget and coming to an agreement, we must remain vigilant, not to stray from the more predictable, sustainable future we labored so hard for so many years to establish to ensure a stronger, more competitive fiscal platform for the benefit of all Pennsylvanians. I'll turn it back to Leader Corman and Leader Comer.
I would take a couple questions, if any.
Senator Corman, could you outline the $500 million in taxes? We know that the business restructuring would take about 240, right?
In their own budget book, the combined reporting proposal minus the reduction in the C&I is still a plus in revenue collection of over $230 million. The severance tax, which he is not in his general fund budget, but it's in his budget book as part of the restore, is over, at least the number last year was over $300 million. So you put those two together and you're all over $500 million, plus there's other things as well, but that's at least the two headliners in his proposal.
There's one thing in here that's couched as a money savings, which is the change to the charter school and cyber charter school reimbursement formulas. Is that something you can see the caucus bargaining on?
Well, we've been working on charter school reform with him. The only thing I would mention is the savings he spent. So essentially, it's not really a savings to the school district. He spends it by making them spend it in ways that he sees fit through either teacher salaries or other spending that he proposed. So the net effect is no savings for the school district. They just pick up new expenditures mandated by the state. But we will continue to work, as we have for the last couple of years, with them on charter school reform. We think that's a very important issue, but I just think it's important to clarify that what savings he thinks he creates in this, he goes ahead and spends, and the school districts don't benefit at all from that.
Wiggle room on those proposals, though?
I'm sorry?
You see some wiggle room on those proposals?
Well, look, we've been tackling charter school reform for some time. We will continue to do that.
Thing. Obviously, you guys have wanted to reduce that tax for a long time, but you seem like you're saying the combined reporting, you see that as a new tax?
Well, yeah, we've been working on this issue for some time, trying to develop a better business tax model for Pennsylvania. And we've had a lot of chambers and organized labor involved in these discussions. We haven't been able to get there yet because we think it is important to lower the C&I. It's very important to lower the corporate net income tax. But lowering business taxes on your left hand and then raising them on your right isn't good for business in Pennsylvania. So the two combined have a net negative impact on the business climate at a time when people are hiring all over the place. Why would we make them pay more to the state when they're using those dollars to invest back into Pennsylvania?
And to be clear, it's not our assessment that that is an increase in tax collections. It's the governor's budget book that pegged it at $239 million in additional revenue. So we're merely reviewing what he has proposed at this point. And because of that net increase, he accounted for it on the cash flow statement. It will, under his projections, net more. Therefore, it does increase taxes.
At this point, you guys don't have a counter proposal for how to make up revenue that would be lost if you reduce the corporate net income tax?
Well, I mean, look, this is the beginning of the process, as I said. We will go through a 3 or 4 week process of appropriation hearings with the governor's agencies to talk about, anywhere from revenue, talking about revenue to the way we can save in spending. So this is just the beginning. This is the governor's day. And he made his vision well known, and we will put some oversight to that vision over the next few weeks.
And actually, I want to provide some further clarity on this because I forgot this in my prior comments. The $239 million, if you look at the effective date, is a 6-month collection in next year's budget. So it'd be a $478 million projected annualized increase. So I think that's important. And in terms of counter proposals and where policies go, we're going to follow the same process that we followed that gave us success over the prior budgets. We will take and look at his proposals, and we'll continue those discussions and work on them between now and June. We, like you, just saw this yesterday and today, so we'll take a while to digest because it is a little light on some specific details, enabling legislation and any of those components. So we're going to have to find out exactly what those numbers are based on and how they arrive at them.
Your initial reaction to the Nellie Bly tuition assistance and using that money from the Racehorse Trust Fund, both of you?
Is that the Horseman Fund proposal?
Yeah.
Well, again, it's one of those proposals that we need to vet through, because there's an impact of taking that money from the Horseman Fund. Obviously, it lowers the purses at those tracks. It maybe lowers the viability at those tracks. Would we have to relieve the mandate of the tracks or the casinos that have tracks to operate those tracks if we're going to take the money? So that has an impact on jobs in those communities. So, the governor, it makes for a nice line here, and that's important for him. But as we go through, we need to vet these proposals and see the total impact of them, and then make a decision from there.
Some significant concerns with Department of Health and Human Services proposed increases, characterizing it as one of the 2 biggest usual suspects. What would your counter proposal look like? Those are expensive programs. What would you aim to do?
Well, actually, the Federal Inspector General had just released a report, and they had identified over $40 million in what they categorize as never events in the healthcare field. That is areas where surgery occurred on the wrong patient, outcomes were unsuspected in terms of an unexpected death or other things. Our contracts at the MCO level say that we will not pay for those. The Inspector General uncovered $40 million there. I think that's a great place to start. That kind of active management is exactly what we're referring to when it comes time to manage those departments. We understand that in terms of projections for number of enrollees in programs and areas like that, it can be difficult to project. There may be overages in those areas, but I think that they can actively manage it in such a way and enforce the contracts to take a good hard look at that, because that's an easy one. And I think there's some other areas as well in terms of outcomes-based healthcare. That's something that I've worked on previously with the governor, and I think that we should take those savings and make sure that we're reinvesting those for better outcomes, not paying for readmissions or other programs such as that. We included that language in the Human Services Code several years ago. The department was supposed to itemize that. We'll see what, if any, savings come with that. Thank you for your time. Thank you for everyone coming. Be happy to make ourselves available.